please let me introduce. I'm very happy that Ms. Katherine Clerides is talking to us. She is a long-time activist for reconciliation in Europe, but especially also referring to the conflict in Cyprus. But she is much more. As a politician and think tanker, she also has been engaged in many human rights topics, such as equality and LGBT rights. So I'm very happy that we can talk about the question of solidarity and Europe in a unified Europe, and also what we can learn about these 30 years of changes. First of all, what do you think? Is there any change concerning these questions in terms of solidarity and equality? How you would actually refer that to the events what happened 1989 to 1991?
Well, I can remember watching the fall of the Berlin Wall on television, and the happiness and joy that I felt, because it seemed like something really wonderful was happening. And of course it was. And then to see the reunification of Germany, to see the induction of former East European countries into the European Union, all of that was wonderfully positive from my point of view. As someone who believes in the European ideal, but not just in the European ideal of sort of European unification, but much greater cooperation between countries around the world and between continents. So for me, yes, it was a wonderful moment. And well, if we look at it now, in the middle of this pandemic, with a crisis in climate change and so on, things don't look so rosy. But I think this is the way history goes. There are ups and downs, and we need to hold on to the positive things and try and work through the negative. And I think a way of working through the pandemic and climate change is if we all work together. I know it sounds trite, but it's actually true. We cannot move forward unless we do things together. Martin Luther King speaks about the beloved community and how to create the beloved community, which means, that everyone has a chance to develop, everyone themselves, much greater equality than what we have in the world. Right now we have such inequality within countries and between countries, and actually we have the resources to solve those problems. We just need to put new structures in place, which I know is not easy. Nobody who has some privilege wants to give it up. But we all need to, because we need to realize that our privilege is built on somebody else's disadvantage, essentially.
When we are looking back about the political decision makers at that time, they were mostly men, or all of them were men, as at least I can remember. So, for example,
Yes.
Helmut Kohl, right? You basically were the first woman elected as a vice president, and also then working also for the women's organizations. And nowadays we have had Angela Merkel, the president of the European Commission, is Ursula von der Leyen. So to see something positive, do you think this has changed, that only men can be in political leadership positions? Or what's your point on that?
Yes, I think we've seen big changes, especially in Europe, but not only. I mean, and it's wonderful to see a vice president in the United States, a woman. We just recently had an election for the president of parliament, which is the second most important position in the Cypriot political structure, and a woman was elected, so that's wonderful. But of course, the numbers, are still the numbers are not what they should be. We certainly don't have 30% representation of women in all decision-making bodies in our country or in most European countries. Perhaps the exception is the Scandinavian countries. So we still have a long way to go, and we still face domestic violence, which is becoming worse with the pandemic in all countries. So we have a lot of work to do, but we have made some progress, definitely.
Yeah, also here in Estonia, what I forgot to say that maybe you might know that also here in Estonia we have female president, Miss Kaljulaid, yeah, which is doing
No, I
actually a great
didn't know
job.
that. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and also prime minister now even, yeah, also female prime minister. So
Oh,
it's exactly
that's exceptional.
it's exceptional. Yes, but anyway, we had a lot of discussions recently within the European Union about a common understanding towards, for example, the migration policy in the light of the so-called refugee crisis 2015-2016. We have also many more conflicts towards the questions of equality if you are looking, for example, to Poland or Hungary. So would you say that we are divided still in these questions? And from your perspective in Cyprus, how you would see that, and what can be done basically to overcome these gaps and to find kind of a mutual understanding?
I think we have, to realize that inequality is not a result of some people being brighter or more hardworking or better in any way. Most equalities arise from, for instance, African countries and some Asian countries having been exploited by colonialism. So, the advantages we have in Western Europe, which we think of as our achievements, have actually been built on the exploitation of others. And unless we realize that, unless we come to terms with the fact that our privilege is built on somebody, has been built on somebody else's back, and the democracies that we're so proud of have been built on the exploitation of Africans and Asians, for example, um, then we will not realize that we have a responsibility. The reason there's so much emigration from these areas and immigration into Europe, desire to come into Europe, is because of this inequality. So we either have to do something about these inequalities, more investment in these countries, a better distribution of taxation of international companies. We need to look at the real problems and not the problems on the surface, which is how many refugees can I take. We need to look at why there are so many refugees. Again, it's not easy because those who are not privileged in Europe, because there are groups in European society who are not privileged, find it difficult to accept the idea that we're going to be generous to somebody else that they think, doesn't deserve it. So it's a question of education too, and realizing that we need to distribute things more fairly within our countries so that we don't have pools of people who are disadvantaged through no fault of their own. And, we have a better world distribution so that everybody has at least a basic standard of living. Exactly how we achieve that, I don't know, but there are many thinkers out there who are working on the issues.
Another important topic you have worked also for the government is all the questions of religious minorities, for example, Armenians. This is a topic from the perspective of the European perspective. I sometimes have the impression that this topic is not much covered in the public. Is that your point as well, or how you would see that? Do you see there also actually an ongoing challenge, or generally also in terms of religion itself? Yeah?
Well, the interesting thing is that in Cyprus, we had Armenians in Cyprus for centuries, and there had been a connection between Cyprus and Armenia for centuries. At one time, I think there was a marriage between a Cypriot king and an Armenian princess, something like that. So they were part of the same country in a way. But the Armenian community we have now is small, and they're mostly people who came as refugees after the massacres in Turkey. My role as Commissioner for Minorities was to make sure, because we have these three small minorities, we have Armenians, Maronites, and Latin community in Cyprus, and as well as the Greek Orthodox and Muslim Turkish community. And the main point is to see that these smaller very small communities are not disadvantaged, and they're able to have education in their own language if they want, to develop their own societies and have equal opportunities to get into the civil service and so on. So I think in Cyprus we have done a fairly reasonable job as far as these smaller communities are concerned. Our big failure has been to be able to cooperate with the Turkish Cypriot community and to overcome the division of the island.
Mm-hmm. And what is actually the reason? Because this conflict is so complicated from the outside view, and actually we have this idea of unified Europe, and we had these events 30 years ago. Obviously, these events didn't help too much, or what would you say? How to find a better mutual understanding also in these times where actually outside of Europe, if you're looking the situation in Russia, in Ukraine, also in Turkey, of course, and also in the Arabian countries after the euphoria with the Arab Spring, there's a lot of disillusion and disappointment about these going conflicts and the rise also of authoritarian structures. So how we can actually tackle that, and I'm not talking about solving, but what can we do in terms of conflict management actually?
I think, gosh, it's a huge question. I think partly, we need to understand that we need to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and try and see the world from their perspective, and they do the same with us, and reach some kind of compromise. The key to solving problems, I think, is compromise. But unfortunately, in our part of the world, maybe everywhere, compromise is not considered to be a good thing necessarily. It's considered to be a sign of weakness in a way. But in actual fact, the only way you can solve problems is through compromise and convergence. And the world is so polarized today that we need to start these dialogues between different groups of people who have very different understandings of the world for whatever reason. But of course, on the ground, you also need to look at the political situation. In Cyprus, we have not only the conflict between Greek and Turkish Cypriots, but we have between Greece and Turkey, and we have the interests of other countries in the region, and this applies to most conflicts. So you need to look at the different levels and see how you can work on different levels, but there has to be a certain amount of realism. And I think one of the downsides of democracy is that it's easier to follow the people and give them what they think they want, i.e., some kind of nationalistic discourse, than to lead the people and explain to them that you can't have everything you want. We have to compromise, we have to give and take so that we can get to a solution and move forward. But when you have a long-standing conflict like the Cyprus conflict, I mean, there are a lot of vested interests in keeping the conflict as it is, keeping the status quo, not the conflict, because it's actually a cold conflict. It's not a violent conflict. If you have a violent conflict, it's different. You have different dynamics. This is a cold conflict. We even have borders where you can cross to the other side and so on. So there isn't much incentive for people to take the plunge and say, I will risk a solution, because it might not be better than the situation I've got now. People are generally are afraid of change, I think, once they get settled into a situation.
How you see now the impact of the pandemic? Do you see the danger of being passive, sitting on the couch, or being frustrated, or do you have the hope that people starting again to mobilize, to travel, to or do some voluntary work, whatever? What is actually your view on this big crisis in which we are right now?
My hope is that people in the wealthier countries, let's say, in Europe, let's talk about Europe, had the time to reflect and think about, how lucky we are in a way, to think about all the things we take for granted, or we used to take for granted, which it seems, are not necessarily always guaranteed to us. Like travel, like being able to do whatever we want. And to realize that, there are other countries that are much, much worse off, and that we can not all come out of this pandemic unless we all work together. Some people seem to have realized that, and I think some of what happened at the G7 summit recently in Cornwall was helpful, in the sense that the richer countries promised to help the poorer countries with the vaccination programs and so on. But it's still being done as if it was charity, rather than as if it's a fundamental human right. Equality is a fundamental human right, and these countries shouldn't have been left in that state anyway. But at least something is better than nothing. It's a first step. And I take heart from, for instance, the fact that Germany recently apologized to Namibia for its colonization there and what it did to Namibians. I think that's a very important step, and it's one that many countries need to make vis-a-vis, and we need to do it in Cyprus. We need to apologize to each other, Greek and Turkish Cypriots, for the pain and suffering we've caused to the other, because we have both caused pain and suffering. We are both victims and perpetrators. And that's an important understanding. If you realize that you are also part of the problem, not only part of the solution, you have to you have to apologize, you have to forgive, and you have to make reparations for what you've done. And I think Germany has done a lot in that respect vis-a-vis Israel. So I think it's a process that most countries need to go through, because most of us have done something bad to others.
I think this is a basic point, what you're just saying, that maybe the idea of a common Europe is to share our pains and also maybe to forgive. because maybe we have learned a lot about European history and these special traumata in the last 30 years. Or what would you say?
Yes, I think that's true, and I think actually in European Union countries, children should be learning, apart from their country's history, which I guess they learn. They should be learning the history of Europe as a whole, so they can understand, the different experiences of people in the West and the East. Um, they should be learning also the truth about colonial times, and not that they went to, Africa or India to civilize people, but to exploit. It's not easy to accept that, but I mean, it's a part of history, and people today are not responsible for that, but they need to take responsibility for it, so that their governments can do what needs to be done. So yeah, I think history is very important, but unfortunately, the way we teach it in schools, at least in my country, it's very one-sided. We are always the heroes, and everybody else is the bad guy. And I'm pretty sure it's much like that everywhere.
It is.
But I mean, we can
It is
take.
everywhere like this.
We,
When I was in school in the
we can.
sorry. When
Yeah, go ahead.
when I was in school, then my history teacher said we are leaving out the German history after 1945. You can learn it at home, because we were dealing with the history before, not just National Socialism,
Yeah.
but everything just before 1945. So yeah, this seems to be a common feature, right?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy to admit that your group of people did something bad, but I think there are ways of teaching it, that it's not this generation of children that are to blame. It's not even the nation that's to blame. It's not a blame game. It's just an acknowledgement of having done something wrong, which I think helps everybody in the end. If you acknowledge and apologize, then you can seek forgiveness and can move forward. I think France and Germany did a good job with, as far as I know, with teaching history. They created some common history books and so on. I remember a professor came to Cyprus and told us about the work that had been done. But to what extent these books were ever used or not, we have a group in Cyprus like that too, who are working on a more sort of honest history of the conflict in Cyprus. But it hasn't gotten into schools yet.
Very interesting. So I got a lot of points of our talk, so just a few aspects I would like to discuss, maybe in a future time more. Let's hope that we maybe will have, hopefully, also a common conference, and also we will keep you updated about the recording and the further procedure, and also the other participants. But I think, Kathy, what is very important, what you said, is this sharing the pains idea, but also in a positive way, to stand for the human rights, and also especially for more equality in our societies. So thank you very much.